Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. Dawn breaks. Men scramble as they prepare to face a beast come out of the sea and obscured by the morning fog. They are a mixed crew, men and sailors from the West, Europe, and Africa, all anxious for the day's combat. Their captain stands transfixed, like a bronze statue, his iron will holding them in check as if they were in a trance. He has faced this beast before, and he still bears the scars from that first encounter. As the fog begins to lift, and the enemy is in plain sight, he orders the first salvo of his cannonade. On January 8, 1815, Major General Andrew Jackson led his outnumbered army to victory over a British expeditionary force commanded by Major General Edward Pakenham at the Battle of New Orleans.
They expect me to stop them with I've got 1,200 men here. Most of those boys don't have shoes, let alone musket flints. How New Orleans, huh?
The battle propelled Jackson to the status of a national hero, and would be remembered as an example of rugged American individualism embodied by the Western rifleman, triumphing over European tyranny, long associated with the British redcoat. The reality was different. It was not the frontiersmen huddled behind cotton bales with long rifle in hand who played the key role in defeating Pakenham's Peninsular War veterans that day, but rather the American artillerymen, whose ball-filled cannons cleared the field of the Chalmette plantation of all opposition.
You go back to your place in line, or by the Lord God, I'll cut you down!
The battle's reception highlights the contradictions at the heart of the Republic, as it stood halfway between a revolutionary past and an industrial future. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Battle of New Orleans was that it ensured the eventual election of Andrew Jackson to the presidency of the United States. It was during the age of Jackson that our author, Herman Melville, would receive an unconventional education, and as that era drew to a close and the nation stood at the brink of civil war, he would publish the great American novel. Moby-Dick, a prose epic that would be both the summation of the antebellum American experience and a break from European literary conventions. It is a literary declaration of independence. In 1819, Herman Melville was born into one of the great families of New York. Both of Melville's grandfathers had been Revolutionary War heroes. One even took part in the Boston Tea Party. Melville took pride in his revolutionary heritage, and the family history would contribute to Israel Potter, his adventure novel of the Revolutionary War. His mother, who came from a Dutch Reformed background, threw herself deeply into religion and ensured that the young Melville would develop a keen sense of guilt and sin. When Melville was 10 years old, Andrew Jackson became President of the United States. Like the Melvilles, Jackson too could claim a connection with the revolutionary past. As a boy, he was a courier for the Patriots in the War of Independence and was captured by the British. After refusing to clean the boots of a British officer, he was slashed by the officer's sword, which left scars on his left hand and head. The popularity of the hero of the Battle of New Orleans would ensure his rise to the presidency on the back of a wave of universal white male suffrage. Once president, he would rule with the same iron grip he had as a general, leading some to accuse him of being a tyrant. His iron grip kept the Union together during the nullification crisis, set up the eventual forced removal of what were then recognized as the 5 civilized tribes, ignoring the ruling of the Supreme Court, which had favored the American Indians, and ensured the destruction of the Second National Bank of the United States. In all this, Jackson claimed to be the champion of the common man and the inheritor of the Jeffersonian legacy.
"You're charming, General, but they had told me you are a peasant."
But a Tennessee peasant, man, that makes all the difference.
Jefferson thought Jackson had the makings of another Bonaparte. On Jackson's self-rule, Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, "His native strength compelled every man to be his tool that came within his reach, and the more cunning the individual might be, it served only to make him a sharper tool." Jackson's rhetoric about the self-made man was belied by the economic realities of the day. The spread of slave labor into the West and the rise of wage labor in the North, often derisively known as wage slavery, created an anxiety among white working men that they may be placed in a financial bondage from which they can never hope to escape. "Who ain't a slave?" asks Ishmael in the opening chapter of Moby-Dick. This anxiety may also explain the rising popularity of the minstrel show in northern theaters. The age of Jackson did not bode well financially for the patrician Melvilles either. Herman's father failed in business and eventually died shortly after declaring bankruptcy. After the economic crash of 1837, largely brought on as a result of Jackson's bank war, Melville was forced to seek work on the waterfront, one of the few places where men could find a steady demand for labor in hard times. In 1841, Melville boarded the Pacific-bound whaler Acushnet. Melville chafed under the strictness of the captain, who practiced what he called sultanism, as well as the abysmal conditions aboard the ship. And when the whaler anchored off the island of Nukuhiva in the Marquesas of French Polynesia, he and a crewmate jumped ship. This adventure would form the basis of his first literary success, the novel Typee, a fictionalized account of his stay among the islanders. The age of Jackson was bound up by the same contradictions embodied by its namesake. For Jefferson, America's future belonged to the independent yeoman farmer. As the old master-apprentice system broke down, it became necessary to ennoble the working man, even one who worked for wages. Melville referred to the whaling ship as "my Yale College" and "my Harvard." In The Glory and Honor of Whaling, Melville elevates the common whalemen by enumerating their mythical forebears. Dragon slayers like Perseus, St. George, and Hercules, along with the prophet Jonah, who was swallowed by a whale, and the Hindu god Vishnu, whose incarnation as a great fish made him, quite literally, a whale man. Indeed, Melville imagines Nantucket as the center of a great world empire with its own manifest destiny, not in the settlement of the West, but the complete subjugation of the world oceans. And thus have these naked Nantucketers, these sea hermits, issuing from their anthill in the sea, overrun and conquered the watery world like so many Alexanders, parceling out among them the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, as the 3 pirate powers did Poland. Let America add Mexico to Texas, and pile Cuba upon Canada. Let the English overswarm all India, and hang out their blazing banner from the sun. 2/3 of this terraqueous globe are the Nantucketers, for the sea is his. He owns it, as emperors own empires. Other seamen having but a right of way through it. Merchant ships are but extension bridges, armed ones but floating forts. Even pirates and privateers, though following the sea as highwaymen the road, they but plunder other ships, other fragments of the land like themselves, without seeking to draw their living from the bottomless deep itself. The Nantucketer, he alone resides and rides on the sea. He alone, in Bible language, goes down to it in ships. To and fro, plowing it as his own special plantation. There is his home. There lies his business. Which a Noah's flood would not interrupt, though it overwhelmed all the millions in China. He lives on the sea, as prairie cocks in the prairie. He hides among the waves. He climbs them as chamois hunters climb the Alps. For years he knows not the land, so that when he comes to it at last, it smells like another world, more strangely than the moon would to an earthsman. With the landless gull that at sunset folds her wings and is rocked to sleep between billows, so at nightfall the Nantucketer, out of sight of land, furls his sails, and lays him to his rest, while under his very pillow rush herds of walruses and whales. Throughout the novel, Melville will raise his common sailors to be the equals of immortals. Deadly labor is necessary for the Republic's future greatness, for America's Industrial Revolution would be anointed in whale oil. Yes, there is death in this business of whaling, a speechlessly quick, chaotic bundling of a man into eternity. Whaling was a lucrative industry for ship owners and agents. For whalemen, it was dangerous and often deadly work. Whale products were in high demand and could be used for a variety of purposes. Spermaceti, a liquid wax extracted from the head of a sperm whale, hence its name, could be used to make high-quality candles, ointments, and cosmetics. Baleen could be used in the manufacture of corsets, umbrellas, and buggy whips. Ambergris, another waxy substance built up in the sperm whale's intestines, was highly valued as an ingredient used in perfumes. And finally, sperm oil, rendered from blubber, was prized for its unique qualities, and more than any other whale product, helped make American industrialization possible. As a lubricant, it is ideal for fast-moving machinery as it can persist in high temperatures. When burned as a light source, it puts off neither smoke nor odor, and was used in homes, businesses, and even lighthouses as a fuel for the lanterns. The life aboard a whale ship, however, couldn't be further removed from the domestic world that whale products were primarily used in. As Melville makes clear, life as a common sailor is as close to slavery as a free man can come to in the antebellum United States. Whaling voyages were often long periods of drudgery, punctuated only occasionally by the terror of a chase. Lookouts would be posted at the masthead, watching for any breaching whales. When one was spotted, whaleboats would be launched and the crew would row furiously towards the quarry. As they closed the distance, they would begin to slow down so as not to spook the whale with too much noise. Once in throwing distance of the whale, the harpooner would drop his oar, pick up his barbed spear, and from the bow of the boat launch it into the back of the whale in hopes that it would stick. The whale would then thrash and dart away, taking the line attached to the harpoon with it. The crew on the boat would allow the rope to run out, or else the boat would be dragged down by the whale. The line, wrapped around a loggerhead at the stern of the boat so as to slow it down, could turn so quickly that the friction would create smoke, and men with buckets would have to pour water over it to keep it from catching fire. All the while, men are having to watch the line as it goes out and hope that it doesn't foul and knock them overboard. They could be dragged across the surface of the water by a 50-ton mammal at speeds of over 30 kilometers per hour, the fabled Nantucket sleigh ride. When the whale was exhausted, the boathead and the harpooner would switch places. As the men pulled the line to bring the boat nearer to the whale, the boathead would sink his lance into the side of the whale to strike at a vital organ. If the whale spouted vapors of blood, the men would cry, "Chimneys afire," and know that its lungs were pierced. The whale would begin its death flurry and swim in ever smaller circles in a pool of its own blood and vomit until it finally rolled fin out. Here, the work of the whaleman had only just begun. After killing the whale, The men would have to tow it back to the ship, chain it to the starboard side, and set up wooden platforms above it, from which to begin cutting in. Layers of blubber would be peeled off into blanket pieces, each weighing about 1 ton. The blanket pieces were hauled on deck and cut into smaller pieces called Bible leaves. Oil would be extracted from the blubber by throwing these Bible leaves into the tryworks, large iron pots set in brick stoves on the deck of the ship. Once cooled, the oil would be placed into casks and stored for the voyage home. Spermaceti would be scooped up in buckets from the top of the whale's head, also known as the case. Its teeth and jaw would be saved for scrimshaw carving. During this process, the ship is converted into a factory, with men working in shifts day and night to process the whale. The work was dangerous. Burning oil could easily be splashed on the sailors as the ship rocked. The blood-covered deck made slipping overboard a hazard, and men could be crushed by falling strips of whale blubber. When whaleboats set out, the crews ran the risk of being crushed by a thrashing whale, knocked out by a fouled line of rope, or worse, being dragged so far out at sea that the ship could not rescue them. The most notorious example of a disaster to befall a whale ship was the sinking of the Essex. After being rammed by a bull sperm whale in the Pacific, the ship went down, leaving the remaining crew adrift on whaleboats and forced to resort to cannibalism for their survival. Melville would have undoubtedly been familiar with this story, as well as the rumors of an albino sperm whale known to stalk the waters off the island of Macha, and fittingly known as Moby-Dick. While Melville depicts the heroism of the common whaleman, he also does not shy away from depicting the danger and cruelty of the business they are in. The whales that are hunted for commerce are also occasionally anthropomorphized in the book, as Melville acknowledges the kinship between humans and these fellow mammals. In the chapter titled The Armada, Melville notes how mother sperm whales are slain while they nurse their young, mingling their blood with milk, and how they will not leave a wounded member of the school, even if it means they will be killed as well. Cannibalism develops as an analogy for whaling itself, as the rapaciousness of the industry would eventually decimate the world's whale populations. One of the ships decked in whalebone, like American ivory, and described as a cannibal itself, is the Pequod. The ship is a microcosm of the United States, and its crew is as racially and ethnically diverse as the country. European sailors mingle with Americans from the Deep South, New England, and the Western frontier. Ishmael notes how among the crew there exists a kind of democratic fraternity, described in language so strong as to embrace homoeroticism. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. All the morning long, I squeezed that sperm till I myself almost melted into it. I squeezed that sperm till a strange sort of insanity came over me, and I found myself unwittingly squeezing my co-laborers' hands in it, mistaking their hands for gentle globules. Such an abounding, affectionate, friendly, loving feeling did this avocation beget, that at the last I was continually squeezing their hands and looking up into their eyes sentimentally, as much as to say, "Oh, my dear fellow beings, why should we longer cherish any social acerbities, or know the slightest ill humor or envy? Come, let us squeeze hands all round, nay, let us all squeeze ourselves into each other. Let us squeeze ourselves universally into the very milk and sperm of kindness." This democratic vision is all the more radical given the racial makeup of the crew. Universal male suffrage extended only to white men in the age of Jackson, yet the harpooners of the Pequod are pagans. Tashtego, the American Indian, Dagu, the West African, Queequeg, the Polynesian, and Fadala, the Zoroastrian Parsi. Ishmael and Queequeg in particular form one of the greatest interracial friendships in American literature. Cooper's Hawkeye and Chingachgook and Twain's Huck and Jim are other notable examples. Ishmael, in coming to know Queequeg and being forced to share a bed with him in the Spouter Inn, accepts him as an equal, and even goes so far as to describe their newfound friendship as a kind of marriage. Now, take away the awful fear, and my sensations at feeling the supernatural hand in mine were very similar in their strangeness to those which I experienced on waking up and seeing Queequeg's pagan arm thrown around me. But at length, all of the past night's events soberly recurred, one by one, in fixed reality, and then I lay only alive to the comical predicament. For though I tried to move his arm, unlock his bridegroom clasp, yet, sleeping as he was, he still hugged me tightly, as though naught but death should part us twain. I now strove to rouse him. "Queequeg!" But his only answer was a snore. Ishmael is not only able to rise above his own prejudices, but is able to accept a democratic vision of the world that encompasses all races and all religions. By the logic of manifest destiny, however, natives were to be displaced, if not outright destroyed, to make way for white settlers, often with black slaves in tow. The very name of the ship, Pequod, is itself a reference to the Pequod tribe, wiped out in a war with New England colonists in the 17th century. Those that escaped the fire were slain with the sword. Some hewed to pieces, others run through with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was conceived they thus destroyed 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see them, thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the same, and horrible was the stink and scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy. Despite the hope of racial harmony, the shadow of Old Hickory still looms over the novel. When Melville returned home in 1844, he found that his brother, Gansevoort, had made a reputation for himself as an orator for the Democratic Party, and it's likely Herman joined him as he campaigned for James K. Polk, a dark horse candidate whom Gansevoort had famously dubbed Young Hickory, the successor of Andrew Jackson, an outspoken advocate for the annexation of Texas. Gansevoort's orations lapped praise upon President Jackson. "I have seen a light arise in the west, and so brilliant was it that it dimmed and obscured all the lesser lights around it. Mr. President, you and I shall never see its like again. We are too old. Such lights do not visit our earth, but at rare and long intervals. I need not say to the Senate or to this audience that the individual I have described is Andrew Jackson." We can hear echoes of his brother's paeans to Jackson in this passage from Moby-Dick. "If, then, to meanest mariners and renegades and castaways I shall hereafter ascribe high qualities, though dark, weave round them tragic graces. If even the most mournful, perchance the most abased among them all, shall at times lift himself to the exalted mounts, if I shall touch that workman's arm with some ethereal light, if I shall spread a rainbow over his disastrous set of sun, then against all mortal critics, bear me out in it, thou just spirit of equality, which hast spread one royal mantle of humanity over all my kind. Bear me out in it, thou great democratic God, who didst not refuse the swart convict, Bunyan, the pale poetic pearl, thou who didst clothe with doubly hammered leaves of finest gold the stumped and paupered arm of old Cervantes. Thou who didst pick up Andrew Jackson from the pebbles, who didst hurl him upon a war-horse, who didst thunder him higher than a throne. Thou who, in all thy mighty earthly marchings, ever cullest thy selectest champions from the kingly commons. Bear me out in it, O God. Despite economic turmoil and the growing sectional divide over slavery, many voters still admired Jackson's accomplishments and his perseverance in the face of personal loss. They supported Manifest Destiny, as the opening of lands in the West meant opportunity for poor whites to recreate themselves. For Melville, Jackson was the model of the romantic hero in the Democratic age. It is this theme of romantic heroism that we shall explore further in Part 2.